In 1915, German archaeologists working in the ruins of ancient Uruk pulled a collection of clay tablets from a foundation deposit buried beneath a temple wall. The fragments were catalogued, crated, and shipped to Berlin. For decades they sat in storage, partially translated, mostly ignored. When Assyriologists finally assembled the full sequence, they found something that did not belong in a 4,000-year-old text. The tablets contained 5 descriptions of future conditions, written in order, each one more specific than the last. The second description matches an astronomical event that occurred less than 90 days ago. The translations are published. The celestial data is verifiable. No one has lined up all 5 descriptions against a single calendar year until now. Most people who study ancient Mesopotamia encounter the same familiar texts: the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, the Code of Hammurabi. These are the gateway tablets, the ones that appear in university syllabi and museum exhibitions around the world. But Assyriology contains a genre that almost never reaches the public. Scholars call them the Akkadian literary predictive texts. They exist, they are published, and they describe the future. In 1975, A.K. Grayson of the University of Toronto released a volume called Babylonian Historical Literary Texts. Inside that book, he presented a collection of cuneiform tablets that did not fit the usual categories. They were not king lists, they were not creation myths, they were not administrative records. These tablets contained sequential descriptions of eras, each characterized by specific conditions: drought, plague, political overthrow, celestial configurations. The descriptions moved forward through time in a fixed order. Grayson classified them alongside other known texts, including the dynastic prophecy, the Uruk prophecy, and a composition scholars call the Marduk prophetic speech. The mainstream interpretation is straightforward. Scholars like Tremper Longman at Westmont College argue these are political propaganda. A scribe working under a new king would describe past events as though they were predictions, building toward a glowing description of the current regime. This is called vaticinia ex eventu, prophecy after the fact. The explanation is reasonable. It accounts for most of the content, but it does not account for all of it. Several of these tablets contain final sections that do not correspond to any known historical period. Grayson himself acknowledged this. The descriptions in those terminal passages match no king, no dynasty, no era in the archaeological record. The standard explanation is that the scribes were simply extrapolating, guessing at what might come next. But extrapolation and genuine prediction look identical when they are carved into clay. The words are the same, only the intent differs. An intent does not survive 3,700 years. What survives is the sequence. 5 patterns, drawn from across the prophetic corpus and the omen literature, each grounded in a published translation, each describing a specific category of collapse, and each one mapping onto a phenomenon that is active and documented in 2026. The first pattern is environmental. It was carved into clay 4,000 years ago, and it describes what is happening to the water right now. The tablet known as the Curse of Akkad is one of the most detailed collapse narratives in Sumerian literature. Gerald Cooper of Johns Hopkins University published the standard translation in 1983. The text describes the aftermath of King Naram-Sin's sacrilege against the temple of Enlil in the city of Nippur. Enlil's punishment was not military, it was environmental. The canals dried up, the fields produced nothing, grain prices rose 8-fold, trade routes collapsed because there was no surplus to move. The barley that once filled the granaries of Akkad turned to dust in cracked irrigation channels. A second text tells the same story from a different angle. The Atrahasis epic, translated by Dugy Lambert and A.R. Millard at Oxford in 1969, describes a divine council deliberately restricting rainfall as the first mechanism of population control. Before the famous flood, the gods tried drought. They turned the sweet water bitter. They made the soil refuse to yield. The Atrahasis is explicit about the sequence. Water failure comes first. Everything else follows. Now consider the American Southwest. The Ogallala Aquifer stretches beneath 8 states from South Dakota to Texas. It supplies nearly 30% of all irrigation water used in the United States. Data from the Kansas Geological Survey shows the aquifer has declined by more than 40% in parts of western Kansas. Some wells that once reached water at 80 feet now drill past 200 and find nothing. Farmers in the Texas Panhandle are watching center pivot irrigation systems shut down permanently because the water table has dropped below the reach of their pumps. The Colorado River tells the same story from a different basin. Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States, dropped to 22% capacity in 2023. Satellite imagery from NASA shows the white bathtub ring on the canyon walls where water used to reach. 7 states and 40 million people depend on that river. The Bureau of Reclamation has imposed mandatory cuts. Cities like Phoenix and Las Vegas are building desalination plants and recycled water systems because the river alone can no longer sustain them. The United Nations World Water Development Report, published in March of 2025, states that 2.2 billion people currently lack access to safely managed drinking water. Projections for 2026 show that number rising. The Sumerian scribes described fresh water turning bitter as the first stage of a cascade. They said it would precede everything else. They said it was the warning that most civilizations would ignore. The scribes said the sweet water would fail before anything else collapsed. They carved that sequence into the clay as though the order itself mattered more than any single event. The second pattern is celestial, and this one requires no interpretation. It requires a planetarium. The British Museum in London holds a collection of clay tablets known collectively as Enuma Anu Enlil. There are roughly 70 tablets in the series containing more than 7,000 individual omens. Francesca Rockberg of the University of California, Berkeley, and the team of Erica Reiner and David Pingree spent decades producing the standard translation, published by Brill in 4 volumes between 1975 and 2005. These tablets are the oldest systematic astronomical records on Earth. The Babylonian scribes tracked every visible planet with naked eye precision across centuries. 2 planets received special attention: Mars, which the Babylonians called the Star of Nergal, god of war and pestilence, and Saturn, which they called the Star of Ninurta, associated with boundaries, agriculture, and divine judgment. When these 2 planets appeared together in the same region of the sky, the omen scribes recorded specific consequences. Tablets 56 through 63 of Enuma Anu Enlil address planetary conjunctions directly. When the Star of Nergal meets the Star of Ninurta, the texts describe the overthrow of armies. They describe pestilence moving through the land. They describe the council of the king becoming confused. The severity of the omen depended on where the conjunction occurred. The Babylonians divided the sky into 3 paths: the path of Enlil in the north, the path of Ea in the south, and the path of Anu running through the middle, corresponding roughly to the zodiacal belt. A conjunction in the path of Anu carried the heaviest omen weight. The companion text Emol Apin, published by Herman Hunger and David Pingree in 1989, maps these paths to specific star groups. The region the Babylonians associated with the constellation of the Great Twins falls within the path of Anu. On April the 29th of 2026, Mars and Saturn formed a conjunction in the constellation of Gemini. This is not interpretation. This is observational astronomy, verifiable through the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory Horizons database, or any standard planetarium software. The 2 planets appeared within half a degree of each other in precisely the region of the sky the Babylonian scribes assigned maximum omen significance. The celestial configuration that Enuma Anu Enlil tablets 56 through 63 describe in specific detail occurred within the last 90 days. What the omen text described next, after the conjunction itself, is a sequence: political confusion first, then agricultural disruption, then military conflict in a region the scribes associated with the eastern trade routes. The conjunction was the trigger event. The consequences, according to the tablets, unfold over months, not days. Whether the rest of their sequence holds is no longer a question about ancient Babylon. It is a question about what happens between now and the end of this year. The third pattern comes from a 5-tablet composition that Assyriologists call the Era Epic. Luigi Cani of the University of Naples published the standard edition in 1969, with an English translation following in 1977. The poem describes the god Era, a deity of plague and destruction, being provoked into action after a long period of dormancy. His weapons are the Sebiti, 7 warrior gods who function as agents of indiscriminate death. Era does not attack immediately. He waits. He watches cities grow complacent. He watches the rituals decay. He watches the institutions designed to protect populations lose their funding and their focus. Tablet 4 contains the critical passage. Era declares that pestilence will sweep through cities whose people have forgotten the old protections. The text is specific about the precondition. The plague does not arrive randomly. It arrives after the watchmen leave their posts, after the walls are left unrepaired, after the knowledge of how to respond has been allowed to fade. The World Health Organization published its Global Preparedness Monitoring Board report in late 2024. The findings were blunt. Global pandemic preparedness infrastructure had declined significantly since 2021. Surveillance systems in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa lost funding. Vaccine manufacturing capacity that was expanded during COVID has been partially decommissioned. Meanwhile, the H5N1 avian influenza strain achieved confirmed sustained mammalian transmission in dairy cattle across 12 American states in 2024 and 2025. Peer-reviewed studies published in Nature and The Lancet documented the mutations that made this jump possible. The Era epic does not describe a specific pathogen, it describes a structural condition. Institutional neglect, creating a vulnerability that pestilence exploits. Epidemiologists in 2026 are documenting that exact structural condition in published peer-reviewed literature. The tablets say Era does not attack the strong. He waits until the watchmen have left their posts. The fourth pattern is political. The tablet known as the Dynastic Prophecy sits in the British Museum under catalogue number BM 40623. Grayson's transliteration describes a sequence of rulers, some placed on the throne by legitimate succession, others arriving through disruption. The text specifies a period when a king shall arise whom no one appointed, not a conqueror in the traditional sense, a figure who fills a vacuum that existing institutions created by failing to function. The Uruk prophecy, translated by Hermann Hunger in 1976, adds a parallel layer. It describes an era when the council of the land shall become divided, when brother contends with brother, when the assembly cannot reach agreement and governance freezes. The VDEM Institute at the University of Gothenburg publishes an annual democracy report tracking institutional health across 180 countries. The 2025 report documented the highest level of democratic backsliding since their measurements began in 1972. Freedom House reported that political rights and civil liberties declined in more countries than they improved for the 18th consecutive year. Constitutional crises occurred on 4 continents in 2024 and 2025 alone. The pattern the dynastic prophecy describes is not about a single ruler. It is about a vacancy, a structural failure in governance that produces a specific type of leader as its inevitable consequence. The tablets did not describe a tyrant. They described a system that had lost the ability to govern itself. The figure who fills that gap is a symptom. The disease was already present. The fifth pattern is the most unsettling, not because of what it threatens, but because of what it promises. The Mesopotamian scribal tradition preserved a story about 7 beings called the Apkallu. These were sages who existed before the Great Flood, credited with bringing all knowledge to humanity. Architecture, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, every foundational discipline traced back to them. The historian Berossus, a Babylonian priest writing in the 3rd century BCE, recorded that before the floodwaters rose, the Apkallu sealed their knowledge in the foundations of temples. They buried tablets in specific locations. They hid what they knew because unrestricted access to it was dangerous. The Bitmesri incantation series, part of the protective ritual tradition, describes ceremonies for summoning knowledge that has been hidden since before the flood. And the Uruk prophecy in its final section contains a passage that scholars have debated for decades. It describes a future age when what was sealed shall be brought forth, when the tablets of knowledge become accessible to those who were never meant to read them. In November of 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT to the public. Within 2 months, 100 million people were accessing it. By 2025, large language models could generate medical diagnoses, write legal briefs, produce functional software, and synthesize scientific literature faster than any human researcher. The knowledge that took decades of specialized training to acquire became accessible to anyone with an internet connection overnight. The Apkallu tradition frames this event with profound ambiguity. The knowledge returns. This is a restoration. But it was sealed for a reason. The sages did not hide it because they were selfish. They hid it because they understood that knowledge without wisdom produces catastrophe. The unsealing is simultaneously a renaissance and a crisis. The question the scribes embedded in their tradition was never whether the sealed knowledge would return. It was whether those who unsealed it would understand what they had done. The Apkallu sealed the tablets before the flood, not to hide the truth. They sealed them because some knowledge, once released, cannot be contained again. Now step back and look at the 5 patterns together. Across the Akkadian prophetic corpus, across the omen literature, across the epic and ritual traditions, these 5 descriptions appear in a consistent order. Water failure first, then the celestial trigger, then plague following institutional neglect, then political fragmentation producing unauthorized authority, then the release of sealed knowledge. The atrahasis gives the environmental sequence explicitly. The dynastic prophecy adds the political layer. The Apkallu tradition places the knowledge event at the terminal point. These are not 5 separate predictions. They describe one process with 5 stages, a cascade, each stage creating the conditions for the next. And in 2026, the water crises are documented and accelerating. The conjunction of Mars and Saturn in Gemini occurred in April. Pandemic preparedness is declining while zoonotic threats are escalating. Democratic institutions are recording their worst performance metrics in half a century. And artificial intelligence has made more knowledge accessible to more people, faster than at any point in recorded history. The sequence is tracking, it is tracking in order. Whether this is coincidence or pattern recognition bias, or something the ancient scribes genuinely understood about how civilizations move through cycles of expansion and collapse, is not a question this evidence can answer. The tablets do not argue, they describe, they present a sequence, and they leave it on the clay. The tablets themselves are real, the translations are published, the astronomical data is verifiable through NASA. Nothing about this material is hidden. It has been sitting in museum cases for over a century behind glass, in rooms full of people who walk past every single day. Around 1900 BCE, a scribe pressed a reed stylus into wet clay and recorded 5 conditions in a specific order. He fired that tablet because he believed the sequence would repeat. The clay has not changed. The sequence has not changed. The only thing that has changed is the calendar.